We have a big update in the case of the vascular surgeon accused of killing his wife and her husband. You are taking a look at a mugshot of Michael McKee, now back in the state of Ohio, the man accused of killing Monique Tepe and Spencer Tepe. And we're also learning some new details from someone who claims to be an ex-girlfriend of Michael McKee. And you will want to hear what she had to say about their alleged relationship. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Hey guys, real quick before we hop into this episode of On the Case, I want to talk about our partner and sponsor, Morgan & Morgan, America's largest personal injury law firm. They're a firm of more than 1,000 attorneys who have recovered $25 billion from more than 500,000 clients. In the past few months alone, a client in Florida received $12 million when insurance offered just $350,000. In Pennsylvania, another client was awarded $26 million. That is 40 times the insurer's offer. Morgan & Morgan makes it easy to fight for what you deserve. You can even start a claim from your phone. So if you're injured, you can start a claim at forthepeople.com/OTC. You can click the link below or scan the QR code on your screen. Well, Michael McKee is now back in Ohio, and he has returned to that state for the first time since police say that he allegedly broke into the home of his ex-wife and her husband and shot them in the middle of the night as their kids were in the home. Now, here is the new mugshot put out by authorities in Ohio this week of Dr. Michael David McKee, professionally a vascular surgeon. And here you see him staring into the camera, accused of a crime that has shaken Columbus to its core. It has shaken so many people who have been following this story from the very beginning. So we're going to talk about what may happen next from a legal perspective in just a moment. We also just learned before this recording when Michael McKee will appear in Ohio court. But I want to get to some new information that we are getting when it comes to filling in the timeline about who Michael McKee is, what he was like, and what he has been up to in the years since his divorce from Monique Tepe. Monique's maiden name was Savatursky. She married Michael McKee in 2015, but it was a marriage, as we have talked about, that came to a very quick end in 2017. Now, as this investigation was going on, it appeared on the surface that this was an amicable divorce. Obviously, no divorce is a pleasure to go through, but this one, it was filed in 2017, and a month and a half later, it was finalized. But clearly, amicable is not the way that anybody would describe this divorce, considering what Michael McKee is now accused of. There's also been just a ton of speculation about Michael McKee, who he was, what he's been up to. I mean, we spoke to a former neighbor of his in Chicago at the luxury high-rise building who said Michael McKee was nice, that she would never suspect that he would be accused of something like he is. But she did say that he was someone who often appeared to be alone, never had anybody really around him. We've spoken to people in his hometown, and they have told us that they remember him being incredibly smart, but sometimes it seemed like he struggled socially to fit in. We found a now deleted TikTok that went viral over the weekend of a woman who claimed to have dated Michael McKee. And in that TikTok, she posted these pictures that appear to show her and McKee when he went to meet her family. Now, we're not naming this woman. We're not showing her face because she didn't respond to us for comment. And frankly, we can't confirm the relationship ourselves. But there were some interesting things that she had to say. Now, we did reach out to this TikTok user to see if she would want to come on and just talk about her experience. She didn't get back to us, and she has deleted that post that was starting to gain traction. It was starting to get picked up by media outlets. This woman says, though, that she met McKee when he was a general surgery resident. So this would be in Virginia, and in 2017, shortly after Michael McKee's divorce from Monique went official. This woman claims that she dated Michael McKee for the end of 2017 and then through the majority of 2018. And she talked about the marriage to Monique Tepe and what Michael McKee told her about that marriage coming to an end. And from McKee's perspective, according to this woman who posted to TikTok, the divorce was a shock for Michael McKee because he had claimed that he came home one day after work and Monique was gone. Their dog was gone, and Monique's stuff was gone. Now, that's certainly one perspective, if that's what Michael McKee believes, because then you have members of Spencer Tepe's family. His brother-in-law told us at Law&Crime that they believe that Michael McKee was verbally abusive to Monique during that marriage, which led to the divorce. Now, the woman said in her TikTok that she is shocked about what Michael McKee is accused of because she felt like he was a nice guy, that he always treated her well, but she ended the relationship because for as nice as he was, they just couldn't find a deep connection. And it just seemed like he had a wall up while they were dating. This is someone who appears to have checked all the boxes from a book smart perspective. The Times Recorder in Zanesville, a newspaper, has an article from 1994 when McKee was in the first grade, saying that he was an honorable mention for a Ohio Secretary of State poster contest. And then when he was 13, the paper has him again mentioned for an excellent rating at a state science day. Then he's 14. He wins the city spelling bee. And then McKee goes on to graduate high school, top of his class there. He was a National Merit Scholar and a Biology Student of the Year and member of the National Honor Society. And he placed in the top 25 at Ohio University's American History Contest and was honorable mention All-State in football. So this was a guy, if it was a LinkedIn profile, you feel like he is heading in the right direction. He then goes to Columbus, and at some point he meets Monique Sabatersky, who goes on to become Monique Tepe. There's pictures on Facebook of the two of them together around 2013, so they end up dating, and then they marry in 2015, and they would have been in their late 20s. So as a married couple, Monique and McKee moved to Virginia, and that's where McKee is continuing his journey to become a surgeon by doing a residency. And on May 2nd, 2017, the marriage officially is filed to come to an end. Monique files for divorce in Franklin County, Ohio. The complaint reads that at the time she filed for divorce, she had been living in Ohio for more than 6 months while McKee was still in Virginia. So this was a marriage that had come to an end long before the divorce was finalized. So roughly a month and a half after Monique files for divorce in Ohio, the divorce was granted on June 16th, 2017. This here's the divorce decree that states the parties are incompatible, and as such, the wife is entitled to a divorce. It goes on to say, the marriage contract existing between husband and wife is hereby terminated, and the parties are hereby released from any obligation of the same except as set forth in the separation agreement. Now, you can see on that day in June, both Monique and McKee signed the document ending their marriage. So the separation agreement lays out the details of the divorce, and this line caught our eye, considering what McKee is now accused of. Quote, each party shall have a right to privacy in their individual residences, except as allowed herein, neither party shall enter the residence of the other without permission of the resident's spouse and only with prior approval. Husband and wife may and shall be free from interference, authority, and control, direct or indirect, by the other fully as if she or he were single and unmarried. Now, perhaps standard wording for divorces, but it's in some ways a sad foreshadowing of what happened inside Monique's home on December 30th. So it's unclear why police think that McKee allegedly chose that day, December 30th, to kill Monique and her second husband, Spencer Tepe, who was a dentist. It's unclear what was going on in his life at the time. Now, the only thing that we know at this point about McKee, as far as the months leading up to the deaths of the Tepes, is that it appeared that he was running from a malpractice lawsuit out of Nevada. This 2024 lawsuit accuses a physician's assistant of inserting a catheter incorrectly before a procedure. Now, the catheter allegedly broke and it left an 8.6-inch part in the patient's body. Now, McKee was working for a surgical group at the time, and he is named in the lawsuit not because of the procedure, but because he, according to this lawsuit, was responsible for training the person who put the catheter in, and the lawsuit alleges that he didn't do that. But the part of this story with that lawsuit that is so concerning is that when it came time to serve Michael McKee with court documents related to this lawsuit, no one could find him. He was gone. The company trying to serve him an amended complaint tried 9 times, and they could not find him in Las Vegas starting exactly 3 months before the murders. And not only did it turn out that his Nevada surgical license had expired in the summer of 2025, but his own office in these court documents is listed as saying that Dr. Michael McKee just disappeared, and it's alleged that the address that he gave to his office was not a real address. Now, at the time that the Teppes were murdered, McKee was working for a medical center out of Rockford, Illinois. It's about an hour and a half west of Chicago. McKee did live in Chicago, though, in a luxury condo building, and these are the videos of police investigating that property after his arrest. And police say they found weapons in his apartment unit on the 12th floor, including one that they claim is tied to the murder scene in Columbus through a preliminary link. Now, police say on December 30th, in the early hours of the morning, McKee allegedly drove from Rockford, Illinois to Columbus, which is roughly a 7-hour drive. He then allegedly entered the Teppes' home and shot both of them in the bedroom multiple times on the second floor, and then he left. And he allegedly drove back to Rockford, where he was arrested days later, close to where he worked. Now, he was allegedly arrested by federal agents with the ATF at a Chick-fil-A more than 10 days after the murders. The Teppes children, who are 4 and 1 years old, they were home at the time that their parents were allegedly murdered by Michael McKee, but they were unharmed. There's also a golden doodle dog that was in the home. That dog was unharmed as well, and all of them are now with the care of family.
Your name, sir, for the record? Michael McKee.
So this is Michael McKee when he made a brief court appearance for the first time in Winnebago County, Illinois. This was on January 12th. He said his name calmly to the judge when he was asked for it, and then he waived his right to extradition, which cleared the way for him to return to Ohio. And that is where we are now in this story. An Ohio grand jury has indicted Michael McKee on 5 counts. So he is no longer just charged with 2 counts of aggravated murder. He is now facing 4 counts of aggravated murder and 1 count of aggravated burglary. And we learned a new piece of information about what he allegedly had on him the night that he allegedly committed these murders. Here is the indictment. And when you look at the counts for aggravated murder, they have a specification for the use of automatic weapon/silencer displayed or brandished firearm. More specifically, quote, the grand jurors further find and specify that Michael McKee had a firearm that was equipped with a firearm muffler or suppressor on or about his person or under his control while committing the offense. Now, on the charge of aggravated burglary, which has now been added on, the grand jury believed that there was enough evidence to prove that McKee trespassed into the Teppes' home and either was in possession of a deadly weapon or attempted, threatened, or inflicted harm to another, which we know he allegedly did, both qualifying factors according to Ohio law. Now, police said they believe this person of interest, you remember this video, that person who was seen on neighborhood surveillance walking behind the Teppes' home around the time that police say they were murdered, between 2 and 5 in the morning on December 30th. They now say that they believe that person of interest, in fact, was Michael McKee. Police have also said there's a lot of information that they cannot release as of yet that they believe ties him to this scene. Now, they have not said how they believe he was able to get into Spencer and Monique Teppes' home. Police have said there was no sign of forced entry. So still at that point, that is a mystery. Now, McKee's attorney for extradition, which was a public defender for his hearing in Illinois, told local media that she expects her client to plead not guilty to the charges he faces in Ohio. And we'll see what happens when he is eventually arraigned. Right now, he is slated to be arraigned in a Columbus courtroom on Friday at 1 p.m. Joining us now to talk more about this case from Ohio is retired Judge Fanon Rucker, now an attorney. Thank you, as always, for being with us on Law and Crime. There's been a ton of attention on this case, and for good reason. There's a lot of information coming out, but now a big development is Michael McKee is back in the state of Ohio. Now that he's been extradited to Ohio, what happens next?
So, and thanks for having me on. Glad to be here. McKee was indicted, but he was extradited. Now, what does extradited mean? It means that you get transferred from one location to the other. And that can happen in 2 ways. One, you can voluntarily agree to be extradited because you know that you're going to have to go and face charges in that new place. Or you can say, no, they have to come and get me. And there's a legal process that usually takes 10 days to 2 weeks in order to facilitate. Here, he agreed to extradition, and so he has waived his right to fight them bringing him back to Ohio. What happens next is that now he's going to be arraigned in front of a common pleas judge. There's generally 2 arraignments when someone in Ohio is charged with a felony charge like he is. He's charged with aggravated murder and aggravated burglary, I think 5 counts. And whenever that happens, there's an initial charge through the municipal court, the grand jury looks at the facts and decides whether or not those charges proceed as originally charged, or whether they should be changed or knocked down or no indictment. And then there's a second arraignment, and then the case gets assigned to a schedule and to a permanent judge, and the ball begins to roll more smoothly.
And when we look at the charges that he's indicted on, specifically aggravated murder, and I think when we hear aggravated murder, we know, not just murder, but it's kind of a level above that. In Ohio, what does aggravated murder mean?
So it's important to understand aggravated murder, that there's a murder first, and the murder charge, of course, is the killing the killing of another without privilege, and murder carries 15 to life. Now, aggravated murder means that there was something else going on in the process. The commission of another felony, as here, aggravated burglary, murder for hire. The aggravated murder says that there were some attenuating circumstances which raised the potential penalty. I mean, the proof is still the same, except you got to add the reason that it was aggravated. You have to prove that. But the potential penalties are really threefold. For murder, having a definite term, 15 to life, to aggravated murder, there's a mandatory life term when it comes to aggravated murder. Now, that life can come with a period of parole after 20, 30, or 35 years, or it can be life with no possibility of parole, or in certain circumstances, aggravated murder implicates the death penalty. And that would have had to have been identified in the indictment, which there's no indication at this time that they're pursuing the death penalty in these charges.
When would that typically come about? If they were to look and say, this is a case where if they believe that Michael McKee, that this was targeted, this was premeditated, we've heard police say that. There were young kids who were in the house, they were unharmed, but certainly an impact on them for a lifetime with what he allegedly did. At what point in the process does the possibility of the death penalty come into play?
Well, the statute in Ohio lays out the circumstances where a prosecutor has the discretion. And let me be clear, the prosecutor always has the discretion whether to pursue the death penalty if the facts actually apply. One of the examples of the state pursuing a death penalty would be where a government official was the victim of the murder. Another circumstance would be if multiple people were killed. For instance, if it was a serial killer. Two doesn't necessarily qualify. Now we look at it in human terms and in regular citizen terms and says, well, that's pretty aggravated. I mean, we look at hate crimes and we say, well, that's aggravating circumstances. True, but every aggravating circumstance or every instance where a person's life is taken, there's an argument that it was unjust and illegal, and therefore the death penalty could be justified. But the statute, particularly in Ohio, is pretty clear about under what circumstances a death penalty specification can be pursued by a prosecutor.
And speaking of specification, when you look at what he's indicted upon, there's a special note there that it's believed that law enforcement believes that he used a silencer allegedly in this. Why does that matter beyond certainly trying to cover up if he's guilty of what he's accused of, trying to cover that up? But why legally does that matter to the point where it would be something specific on the indictment that they believe he used a silencer?
Well, in addition to the aggravated burglary charge, which is an aggravating circumstance, committing a murder while in the process of committing another felony, that felony of using a silencer in the commission of a murder could also be an aggravating factor, which they can use or argue was, in fact, a basis for the aggravated murder charge instead of just the murder charge. The silencer factually and historically has been used in a way to attempt to cover or to hide the malicious acts of an individual committing some type of crime like this. And so the use of a silencer and the way that he left the scene and tried to hide his identity and took off, and those are all added in as probably more about motive and acts than it is to enhance the penalty that he may be facing here.
You look at this case and from the beginning, horrific that these two people lose their lives. And then as you're following the it was a mystery for a period of time. And he's certainly just accused at this point. He hasn't been found guilty, but then for it to be this ex-husband she had from roughly a decade ago, and he's this vascular surgeon from out of state, you can see why a lot of people are interested in this story. In your line of work and as a judge, I mean, you have, been part of cases involving some really, really bad people, and Michael McKee is accused of being that. Just what stands out to you about him to this point with his background and what he's accused of doing?
Well, I'll tell you, as a judge, and I was a judge for 13 years. I was a prosecutor before I was a judge. And one of the things that became clear to me early on in my career is that the idea of the justice system being more focused on the actions of individuals than the character of what we believe a person to be is much more important. Unfortunately, when we look at people with certain professions, we look at doctors, we look sometimes at lawyers, although there's a lot of bad lawyer jokes out there about the heinous acts that lawyers commit. But there's a lot of professions that tend to surprise us when we hear or believe that they're engaged in criminal activity. The truth is there are sociopaths and psychopaths and dangerous people who are able to navigate educational systems and get jobs in whatever profession we are in. And it seems here that someone who 10 years after a divorce has in their minds the intentional and deliberate goal to return to his former wife's home where there were children there and execute her husband and his ex-wife while the children are there. That seems like someone who either has deteriorated or has had some very ill intentions for quite some time and maybe was glossed over because of his profession as a vascular surgeon.
The police chief in Columbus at her news conference said something along the lines that they believe that this was an act of domestic violence. And clearly there was this marriage that was there, and you can make that tie between Michael McKee and Monique Tepe. But the big question for a lot of people who've been following this case is why? Like, why now? Why would he allegedly do this the day before New Year's Eve? They've been divorced for a long time. He's lived in other states. She has moved on with her life. But then when you look at convicting him, and if he is guilty of what he's being accused of, how important is it that prosecutors figure out the why as to why it happened on that particular night and what exactly the motivating factor specifically was?
Well, in proving, and let's understand in criminal convictions, proof beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the highest standard that our legal system affords or requires in order to take people's lives, their liberty, or their property, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Motive is helpful to proving or to obtaining that standard, but it's not required. If all they ever are able to prove or to produce is the evidence that in fact shows that he was the person who committed these heinous murders, the motive is not required. The motive would be helpful, perhaps, and certainly I can promise you that the seasoned investigators and detectives who are working this case are feverishly working to pour through evidence. We have online stamps, we have social media stamps, and they're going to be relationships and coworkers that are interviewed by detectives to see if they can obtain some hint of a motive. It's helpful, but it's not required to establish that proof beyond a reasonable doubt. We may never know unless there is some tip of the iceberg that is revealed during the investigative process, or perhaps if he is in fact guilty of these offenses, he decides to reveal it himself.
There's a lot that we still don't know and will come out, because we're still in the very beginning stages of this. But of the evidence that the Columbus Police Chief Elaine Bryant put out there, we know that they believe they have video surveillance of him behind the home. They believe that that person that they see, the person of interest, gets into a vehicle that then drives back to Rockford, Illinois, and they say that that is his car. Then they also searched his apartment in Chicago, and they believe they have a preliminary link to a weapon that was used in the murders of the Tepes. From the public's perception, I mean, that seems pretty strong evidence against somebody. For the defense attorney, whoever they may be taking over this case, I mean, how do you approach it knowing that, I mean, even just having the ex-husband around the time that the husband and wife are killed and he's in the area and he lives in Illinois, like that's damning in and of itself, though circumstantial. Like, how as a defense attorney do you take on this case knowing that you're going to have to battle those different elements if you truly believe that Michael McKee is innocent?
You know, when we try cases in the court of public opinion, it's very different than the courtrooms where I used to wear a robe and make decisions. The things that we see and that we're allowed unfiltered to know during this part of the process, the fact that a gun potentially tied to this crime found in his home in Illinois, potentially the individual who they observed on the videos is him. And even though he was hiding, his gait, kind of led them to believe that this was in fact the same person. Those are all things that as we in court of public opinion are watching said, oh man, clearly he's the one, he did it.
Right.
But in court, a motion to suppress may be filed in order to challenge the right of the police to enter the home where the gun was found. And what happens if, in fact, they enter that home without legal authority to do so? That gun that was tied to the scene potentially never comes in. What happens if the defense attorneys focus on the idea that, yes, he may look like the guy in the camera footage, but there's not necessarily proof beyond a reasonable doubt that that actually was him. There was another neighbor who lived 3 blocks away who walked in a similar way and had a similar height. I mean, each of those issues are looked at in isolation by a good defense attorney to discover how and what needs to be challenged. Because again, proof beyond a reasonable doubt is the highest standard that we have in our legal system. And though we, again, with our unfiltered eyes, see and hear the evidence that is being put forward, and it's not a lot right now, are being put forward, there are legal requirements and mechanisms that are required at each stage of the process for that evidence to even be considered by the jury or the judge that's going to make the decision in this case.
And lastly, I think of whoever the judge is in this case, and suddenly you have been handed a case that is going to get a lot of media attention for as long as it goes. And there are going to be cameras potentially in the courtroom that are watching your every move. And you're going to start being, and as a judge, I mean, you handle big cases, I get it. But then to have that moment where everybody now is watching you, everybody knows your name, that it's a national news story, like how does a judge prepare for that in ways that maybe we don't realize from the outside?
Well, there were certainly many times during my career that the courtrooms were packed with cameras. Every news station town, there were a couple of that had national news implications. And the way that I, as a judge, approach, and I would suspect that the judge who's assigned the case would handle it, is the same that the expectation of every judge who handles those cases, and that is with the unbiased, non-predetermined notion that they handle every single case, that they would give it the deliberate review and consideration of the law and the facts as they do every case. As a judge, I was careful not to treat any case any differently. Number one, based on who was standing in front of me. And number two, based on who may be watching or have an opinion about it. At the moment that I, as a judge, start yielding to public clamor or what I think that the wishes of the community may be or who's watching, at that time I violated my oath. And that was something I was very careful to do, and what I suspect the great majority of the judges who swear to uphold the Constitution and bylaws of our country do the same. So I would suspect that there won't be any difference in how that judge moves than if the cameras are not there.
And we'll see how this story plays out. Obviously, a lot of attention. Michael McKee now back in Ohio to face these very, very concerning charges. We'll see how it plays out. Retired Judge Fanon Rucker, attorney. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thank you for being with us.
Glad to be here. You have a wonderful rest of your day.
Again, Michael McKee is expected in court this week on Friday at 1 p.m. That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify, and you can also now find episodes of On the Case on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.